You know, sometimes you hear the most intense conversations in the most random spots. Like
Hmm.
the other day, I was at the garden center just looking around, and these two people are going at it about tree balm.
Mm.
It was kind of funny, actually. They were really getting into it. I think their names were Kesser and Steen or something like that. But anyway, Steen is convinced that you absolutely have to use this stuff after you prune a tree.
Uh-huh.
But Kesser wasn't so sure.
It's funny how some topics get people fired up.
Yeah, right. So that got me thinking, is this stuff actually good for trees? Or is it like one of those old wives' tales?
That's a great question, and that's exactly what we're going to get to the bottom of today in our deep dive into tree wound care. So if you've ever wondered if you should be using tree balm after pruning, this one's for you.
Right. Because let's be honest, most of us just do what our parents or grandparents taught us. But sometimes the old ways aren't always the best ways, especially when it comes to something as complex as a tree.
Absolutely. So you mentioned that one of the guys, Kesser, was skeptical about the tree balm, right? Well, he was talking about this tree expert, Dr. Alex Shigo. Have you heard of him?
Vaguely.
Okay, well, he basically revolutionized how we think about tree care. His research showed that a lot of the conventional wisdom was actually wrong, and that using things like tree balm can often do more harm than good.
Really? Okay, so what was Kessler's concern? I mean, it makes sense to want to protect a fresh cut, right? You put a Band-Aid on a wound on your arm,
Right.
so why not on a tree?
Well, that's where it gets interesting. See, trees, they don't heal the same way we do.
Oh,
They don't regenerate tissue. Instead, they compartmentalize.
okay, compartmentalize. What does that even mean?
Imagine a castle under siege. Okay.
Okay,
So instead of sending out their troops to fight everywhere, they focus on fortifying the inner walls,
uh,
containing the threat. Trees do something similar. They don't heal the wound in the same way we do. They isolate the damaged area. Shigo called this process Cody compartmentalization of decay in trees.
so the tree is building its own internal defenses.
Exactly.
But how does that relate to the tree bomb?
Well, people used to think that you had to cover the pruning wound to protect it from the elements and from disease. But Chigo's research showed that applying a sealant could actually mess with that whole compartmentalization process.
So it's kind of like trapping the enemy inside the castle walls.
You got it.
Not a good strategy.
It prevents the tree from forming those protective barriers. And on top of that, that balm traps moisture, creating the perfect breeding ground for bacteria and fungi. So it's like the opposite of what you want.
So Kessler might have been onto something with his skepticism.
Yeah.
The funny thing is, the source material we're looking at today mentions that Kessler still wasn't totally sold on this idea of not using anything on the wound. He actually decided to reach out to a professor at Cornell University, a real expert in the field. I'm curious, what did this expert have to say about all of this?
Well, he basically confirmed everything Shigo's research has shown. His advice was super clear: avoid wound dressings. And that means no balms, no sealants, no magic potions that your grandpa might swear by.
Wow, okay. So no balm. Got it. But what are you supposed to do then? Just leave the wound alone?
It's not just about doing nothing, it's about using proper pruning technique.
Okay.
The professor really emphasized making clean cuts and respecting the tree's natural structure. That means avoiding something called flush cuts.
Flush cuts. What are those?
A flush cut is when you cut a branch off right against the trunk, and that damages a crucial part of the tree's defense system called the branch collar.
Okay, so avoid flush cuts. What else?
Well, the branch collar you just mentioned is that slightly swollen area where the branch meets the trunk. It's full of special cells that help the tree seal off wounds.
Oh.
If you cut into that, you're basically compromising its immune system.
Okay, so we have to protect the branch collar. But sometimes you have to remove larger branches. How do you do that without hurting the tree?
That's where something called the three-cut method comes in. It helps you minimize damage when you're taking off bigger branches.
Okay, so clean cuts, avoiding flush cuts, and maybe learning this three-cut method. Anything else we should keep in mind?
Yeah, the timing of your pruning matters too. Different species have different optimal times for pruning, so that's something worth looking into for your specific trees.
Got it. So it sounds like there's a lot more to tree care than just slathering on some balm.
Absolutely. And actually, going back to our friends Kesser and Steen for a second, the source material mentions another interesting thing that came up in their conversation. So it turns out there was this older guy at the garden center listening to Kesser and Steen go back and forth about the tree balm.
Mm-hmm.
And this guy, he just chimes in and says the best thing to do is pack some soil on the wound.
Soil. Really? That's what he said?
Yeah, like it was some kind of old-fashioned remedy.
I don't know about that. Seems like that would just introduce a bunch of bacteria and fungi right into the cut.
Yeah, Kesser had the same thought. And he's right to be skeptical. Remember, trees have this amazing ability to compartmentalize decay. Putting anything on that wound is just going to mess with that process.
Yeah, it'd be like leaving the castle gates open for the enemy to just walk right in.
Exactly. Introducing foreign material disrupts those natural defenses that the tree has developed over millions of years. So no soil.
Okay, no soil. Got it. But you know what's funny?
What's that?
The source material mentions Kesser bringing up urea.
Urea.
Yeah. He even makes a joke about, well, relieving himself on a tree wound.
Yeah.
I mean, is there any truth to that, or is it just garden center humor?
That's actually a really interesting question. It does sound a little crazy, right?
Yeah.
But Kesser wasn't totally off base. Urea is a nitrogen-rich compound. It's found in urine, and it does have some antifungal properties.
So there is a connection to Treecare.
There is, but it's very specific. Traditionally, urea was sometimes used to fight a fungal disease called honey fungus, but it was a very targeted application, not just something you do for every little pruning cut.
Got it. So no peeing on the trees.
Probably best to leave that to the professionals if it's really needed.
Okay, good to know. So we've ruled out tree balm soil and, other bodily fluids.
Right. And it all comes back to understanding how trees actually heal. We talked about compartmentalization, but there's also something called callus tissue.
Callus tissue. Is that like the same thing as compartmentalization?
It's related, but not exactly the same thing. Think of it this way. Compartmentalization is what's happening inside the tree, building those internal walls.
Yeah.
Callus tissue is what you see on the outside. It's like a mass of cells that forms around the wound, kind of like a scab.
So it's a sign that the tree is healing.
Yep, exactly. It helps seal off the wound and protect the tissues underneath. It's a good thing to see.
That's good to hear. The source material mentions that even after talking to that professor at Cornell, Kesser was still a little hesitant.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He just felt like doing nothing just seemed wrong somehow. Too passive.
I can see that. It's natural to want to do something to try to fix things right.
Right.
But sometimes the best thing we can do is just let nature do its thing.
It's like a whole philosophy of tree care.
I like that. And it really applies to a lot of things in life, doesn't it?
It does. So did the professor give Kesser anything else to put his mind at ease?
He did. He reminded Kesser that trees have been around for millions of years. They've evolved these incredibly effective ways to defend themselves, and they're remarkably good at healing on their own as long as we don't interfere.
So sometimes the best thing we can do for our trees is to just leave them alone.
Pretty much. We don't always need to jump in with these quick fixes that might actually do more harm than good.
Okay, so we've debunked the myth of tree balm. We've learned about the amazing powers of trees to heal themselves. But what else can we do to help our trees thrive?
Well, that's a great question, and it leads us to this idea of proactive tree care.
Proactive tree care. Okay, I like that. What does that actually look like, though?
It's all about creating the best possible environment for your trees to grow and thrive. So things like making sure they have enough water, especially during dry spells,
Okay.
and using mulch around the base of the tree, to help keep that soil moist and prevent weeds from popping up. And in some cases, you might even need to fertilize to give them the extra nutrients they need.
So it's kind of like we're taking care of their basic needs.
Exactly, just like we would with any other living thing.
Right. It makes a lot of sense when you put it that way.
Trees need certain things to stay healthy. And the more we can support them, the better they'll be able to handle stress. Things like pests or diseases, or even just the stress of pruning.
That's interesting. Now, I know the source material mentions this technique called gradual reduction. Sounds like a gentler way to prune larger branches. Can you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, gradual reduction is a technique where instead of taking off a huge branch all at once, you prune it back in stages over time.
Okay.
This gives the tree a chance to adjust to the changes, in its structure and how it's distributing energy.
Oh, that makes sense. So you're easing it into its new shape.
Exactly, instead of just making a drastic change all at once. And it's really all about recognizing that the tree is a complex, interconnected system. And by pruning gradually, you're minimizing the shock to that system and hopefully reducing the chances of decay.
We're working with the tree instead of against it.
I like that. It's a good way to put it. And that philosophy really applies to so much more than just trees.
It does.
It's about seeing the interconnectedness of everything and trying to find a way to work in harmony with nature.
That's a great point. So we started this conversation talking about tree balm, but we've really learned so much more than that.
We have.
It's amazing how much we've uncovered just by following this one question.
It's a great reminder that curiosity can lead to such incredible insights, and that it's always a good idea to question what we think we know and to seek out reliable information.
For sure. So for anyone listening, if you're ever facing a tree care dilemma, just think back to Kesser and Steen and how they weren't afraid to challenge conventional wisdom.
Right. Don't just go for the easy fix. Take some time to really understand your trees, learn what they need and how you can help them stay healthy and resilient.
And remember, sometimes the best approach is to just let nature take its course. Trees have been doing just fine for millions of years without our meddling.
Well said. I think we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of tree care. We hope you learned something new and maybe even gained a new appreciation for the incredible resilience of trees.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
See you next time. Sometimes you hear the most intense conversations in the most random spots. Like the other day, I was at the garden center just looking around, and these two people are going at it about tree balm.